And Chicago's Morning Answer continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So on Friday and into yesterday, Trump got the formal endorsement of two former Democrats, RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, Friday and Monday, respectively. And I think both of them actually have hit upon some important issues that should be amplified by Trump. RFK was on with Tucker Carlson after his appearance at that Trump rally in Glendale on Friday. And he talked again about not just the importance of free speech, but the ability of a presidential candidate to use his or her speechifying to actually explain and defend the positions they take.
Being able to defend their policies and being forced to defend their policies articulately, eloquently. And, my uncle and father just thought ideas are important and we should be able to defend them. And if you can't defend them, there's something wrong with you.
Yes.
And, why? So we have a presidential candidate that was selected by the Democratic Party who can't do that.
And Tulsi Gabbard hit upon another issue, since it's not just Trump that's experienced political retaliation, it would appear. Well, certainly it's not just Trump. There's a lot of examples that we've talked about over the years, like that pro-life activist in rural Pennsylvania comes to mind, many others. But Gabbard's political retaliation, which is really curious, a former member of Congress, a former member of the military who served that country in an actual theater of war, unlike some people. She talked about the political retaliation, and there's just no explanation for it. Still waiting for one, and I'm sure we'll be waiting forever for one. Why is she being followed around by U.S. Marshals?
And we can't live free as long as we have a government that is retaliating against its political opponents and undermining our civil liberties, weaponizing our very institutions against those they deem as a threat. Kamala Harris has done this over the last 3.5 years. She won't hesitate to continue that if she is elected as president. President Trump has been their first and foremost target in this because they don't want us as voters to even have the option to vote for him. I've been their most recent target, added to a secret domestic terror watch list after exposing the truth about what kind of dangers we would face if Kamala Harris is elected as president. We as Americans must stand together to reject this anti-freedom culture of political retaliation and abuse of power. We can't allow our country to be destroyed by politicians who will put their own power ahead of the interests of the American people, our freedom, and our future.
Yeah, I don't know why Tulsi Gabbard is getting the lives of others treatment. I don't know whether she's exposed anything about Kamala Harris that people don't otherwise know. People have also said, but they don't provide an explanation. And so one is left to wonder. And it's sort of interesting because I think the two issues fold together nicely. They cancel or try to silence people who speak in support of things that they don't support or in opposition to things they do support. And meanwhile, they never have to provide any explanation for anything that they say or do, no matter what the implications, no matter what comes from what they've said or done, or no matter how inconsistent what they're saying today is from what they were saying 5 minutes ago. Dan Henninger is the deputy editor of the Wall Street Journal's editorial page. He joins us now. Dan, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hi, good to be with you guys.
So, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, you're raising a lot of interesting points there, Dan, to be sure. But, this is the current version of the Democratic Party's modus operandi to silence their critics and not answer for it. We don't need to get into Kamala Harris's refusal so far to subject herself to any kind of serious questioning regarding the contradictions in her past positions. But let's go over to what RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard were just talking about. I think we can raise the stakes here considerably beyond the likes of Tulsi Gabbard and note that they have carried out the same actions against conservative members of the U.S. Supreme Court. We had demonstrations, right, outside the houses of the court members, Brett Kavanaugh, Samuel Alito. The attacks on Clarence Thomas have been relentless, and those attacks are meant indeed to intimidate those justices. And Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island, who is a leading proponent of these criticisms of conservative justices, has just said in the past few days, along with Senator Chuck Schumer, that if they get control of the Senate, Schumer will try to end the filibuster, even if he only has 50 votes. And if they manage to do that, Whitehouse says they're going to enact term limits for the Supreme Court. So they are on the offensive, and it's really a striking irony to see what hardball they do play against all of their opponents as they stage this really fairy tale of a convention in Chicago with, believe it or not, the crowd there even chanting USA, USA.
I know. Have you ever seen so many American flags? And I've never seen that at a DNC before. Have you?
Never.
So they're trying to change they're wearing camouflage. They have the Harris Walls hat on. But do you think this is, and they're also playing country music and had the Dixies sing the national anthem. Do you think that this is going to stick, though, that this is going to, convince rural America that the Democratic Party really cares about them?
That is a really interesting question. I might get into that this week. All it has to do is last for about 70 days, right? The idea that anyone would buy into this stuff. And I think we do live in a culture now. I always try to premise these remarks at the moment by the reality that the election is going to be decided in 7 swing states by undecided voters, right? Not by the whole country, but by those people, a very small slice and percentage of voters, whether it's young men, suburban women. They're the ones who have to look at this and decide whether they believe it. Unfortunately, I think we do live in a culture. It's kind of a cell phone screen culture where people are flitting from one subject to another all the time, trying to see whether there's a new restaurant they can go to, whether there's a new line of clothes they might like to try on. People today are very susceptible and vulnerable to these kinds of marketing pitches. They look at them and they might even play with them for a while. And I think Kamala Harris does have some momentum, and it is sort of based on that she is simply new. And the question is whether she can keep this soap bubble afloat for the next 2 months. I think that's an open question.
What sort of impact do you think particularly RFK has coming over to Trump's camp? Because, the supposition is he's seen his support prior to suspending his campaign. He saw support from, in some places high single digits, low double digits. It was about cut in half when Biden exited stage left and Kamala entered. So one sort of surmised that, okay, well, the what's left of RFK's support are people who are uncomfortable with Trump, but if the choice came down to Trump and somebody else, they are more likely to fall with Trump than somebody else. And so, I mean, a couple of points, even if they don't all come over, a couple of points in those swing states that you were just describing that are the margins are razor thin, seems like he could have a real impact.
I think he could have an impact, Dan, if he not only supports Trump, but engages in some real outreach and turnout among his supporters. Because I think a lot of those RFK supporters were young people who were really, really disaffected with both parties and disaffected with both candidates. And there's a possibility that with RFK out of the race, they simply won't vote. They will turn off. And I think there's a burden on him to appeal to them directly if he's going to support Trump, and appeal to them directly and make a case for why they should come over to Trump. It's a funny thing. We all have like kids, grandchildren, or in their early 20s. Fact of the matter is, if you're a 23-year-old guy, Donald Trump looks like a pretty old guy, looks like somebody from the country club or something like that. And they just see older people differently. And I know RFK Jr. is very young, 70-something, but I think he's going to have to help Trump. It can't just be speaking on behalf of Trump. He's going to have to appeal directly to those supporters of his.
Well, I agree with that, but the Gen Z gender dichotomy is really interesting. So Gen Z, 18 to 29-year-old men, Trump's plus 10. 18 to 29-year-old women, he's minus 40. So, and historically, young men, that age demographic, turn out about 4 or 5 points less than young women. So if Trump can motivate young men to turn out, to your point about RFK as well, helping there, even if he just evens sort of the turnout numbers and the distribution doesn't change much, it certainly helps him. But I mean, it really speaks to also what the future looks like when there is that wide a gap between young men and young women in terms of their political dispositions.
Yeah, I mean, you're raising a big subject, the psychological and economic status of young men these days. And I think on that score, Trump has talked so often about how during his first presidency, the unemployment rate among Black and Hispanic men fell so low. And I think there was a broader issue that he's talking about there that can be extended to younger white men as well, which is that Trump's presidency created economic opportunity. It created economic opportunity in the private sector, real jobs, a job you could go to and expect to get paid, unlike Kamala Harris, who is talking about the federal government showering people with money, which is somehow public money, which is somehow supposed to help them, but what it only does, and I think a lot of those young Black and Hispanic men realize that it just helps them run in place without a job. And Trump is very good at talking about, because he's a private sector guy, he's very good at talking about economic opportunity for Gen Z men. And I'm hoping that he makes that a primary pitch going forward the next 2 months.
You think this all comes down to 90 minutes on September 10th?
If that happens, another question. I don't necessarily think so. We shall see. I understand why Kamala Harris wants to use open mics. Her strategy is to poke the bear. That was their strategy during the convention. Trump is pokeable. Mm-hmm. And he understands that. He talks about it himself. So I think Trump is trying to absorb that reality, and it's going to have to take some effort on his part. But he has a case to be made on her and on her contradictions and on his own policy. And if he can do that, I think he could come out of that debate looking pretty strong.
Zuckerberg's statement yesterday that, the G did pressure me to be a censor in 20 and 21 during COVID, and I complied, and I shouldn't have, and I'm not going to do it again. I mean, we've known this for a while. It's interesting, the timing of the statement he makes and the message that he's sending. And I wonder how you interpret it and its impact as it pertains to, what RFK was talking about, this sort of the free speech and the free exchange of ideas on platforms like Meta.
It's a real problem. We went through this with COVID and the dissenters from the lockdowns and so forth, the Barrington Declaration. Those people were ostracized, and they were ostracized on social media. And it's one thing for Mark Zuckerberg to say that. It's one thing for a spokesman at Google to say that sort of thing. The problem is that the people administrating those social media sites for these companies know exactly where their politics are, and it isn't that hard for them to manipulate those algorithms in a way that suppresses people like that. So I think Zuckerberg's feet should be held to the fire, although it may well be it's just too late to do that these social media platforms are going to be used for intimidating people, ostracizing them. Let's recall, when Facebook started, the first thing people started to worry about was the way young teenage girls were being ostracized by their friends and intimidated. That was the template. And years later, we discovered you can use that same technique to ostracize and intimidate people in politics. And that's where we are today. It's unfortunate, but that's the way these social platforms like Instagram, Facebook, and Google are being used.
Yeah, and if you really don't like the platform or its founder, then you just arrest him.
Yeah. Telegram.
Dan Henninger, deputy editor of the Wall Street Journal's editorial page. Dan, thank you as always.
All right, good to talk to you guys. Bye-bye.
Yeah, our pleasure. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to podcasts of Dan and Amy from the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Join Allie Beth Stuckey and the Illinois family.